In 1945, the United States government injected a house painter with plutonium. He did not have cancer. They knew that within weeks. They paid him $50 a month to stay nearby and collect his own contamination samples. He thought they were being kind. He lived for 21 years as the most radioactive human being in recorded history. He painted houses. He raised a family. He died at 79, peacefully. He never knew a single thing.
This is not a conspiracy theory. This is a declassified government file, and it is one of 18.
His name was Albert Stevens. He walked into a San Francisco hospital with a stomachache. He walked out as patient Cal 1. The program that chose him had a name too, the Manhattan Project. The same program that built the atomic bomb was quietly building something else at the same time, a list of human beings it had decided were already dead.
Welcome to ExploricaGlobal, where we uncover the stories the world overlooked.
The program.
1945, the New Mexico desert. Inside the most classified facility in human history, scientists were building a weapon that would end a war. They were 3 months from detonating the world's first atomic bomb, and they had a problem. The men and women working with plutonium every single day, nobody knew what it was doing to their bodies. Nobody knew how much was too much. Nobody knew what happened when it got inside you and stayed there. They needed answers. They needed them fast, and they needed them before the bomb dropped. So they did what governments do when they need something urgently and don't want to ask permission. They chose people who couldn't say no. There was another layer of secrecy that made what they were planning even more disturbing. Plutonium itself was classified. The word could not be spoken outside of the Manhattan Project. In classified documents, scientists referred to it only by code. They called it 49. They called it the product. They were about to inject human beings with a substance that officially did not exist. And the people they injected would have no way to describe what had been done to them because they were never allowed to know its name. The scientists had a rule for choosing their subjects. They would only use patients who were already dying, people diagnosed with terminal illness, people with no future to protect, people whose deaths could be explained by their existing conditions, people who were, in the cold language of the program, expendable. Not one of them signed a consent form. Not one of them was told what the product was. Not one of them understood what was being done to them. They were looking for people already sentenced to death. What they did not know is that one of their choices had no death sentence at all.
3 stories. Story 1. Eb Cade, the man who happened to be handy. March 24th, 1945, Oak Ridge, Tennessee. A man named Eb Cade was in a car accident. He was 53 years old, a cement mixer, a working man. He was taken to the Manhattan Project Army Hospital with fractures in his arm and his leg. He came in for broken bones. He left as subject HP-12.
On April 10, 1945, while Eb Cade waited for his broken bones to be set, a doctor administered a plutonium injection. The dose was nearly 5 times the maximum limit that scientists had calculated to be safe for humans. Then they waited. They did not set his bones for 5 more days. They needed to collect bone samples first. They extracted 15 of his teeth. They shipped them to Los Alamos for analysis. Nobody told Eb Cade anything. He lay in a hospital bed with a broken arm, a broken leg, and 15 missing teeth, and no one explained why. A nurse later recalled that Eb Cade simply disappeared. He discharged himself without explanation in the middle of the night. He walked out of a Manhattan Project hospital with plutonium in his blood, and he never came back. He never knew what had been done to him. 8 years later, Eb Cade died of heart failure. The government noted his death, filed the paperwork, moved on. He was the first. He was far from the last. You already know his name from the opening, but you need to understand what his life looked like before that hospital. Albert Stevens was a house painter. He was 58 years old. He had a wife. He had a family. He had calloused hands and a reputation for clean lines. In May of 1945, he went to the University of California Hospital in San Francisco with a stomach complaint. The doctors looked at his stomach and gave him the worst news a man can receive: terminal cancer, 6 months to live. Experts recommended a gastroscopy to confirm the diagnosis. Nobody ordered the gastroscopy. Instead, Manhattan Project scientists heard about a dying man in San Francisco, and they moved quickly. On May 14, 1945, 3 months before the bomb fell on Hiroshima, Albert Stevens was injected with plutonium. He did not know it was plutonium. He was told nothing. The dose he received was considered by the scientists who administered it to be many times the lethal amount. They expected him to die within months. He would give them their data. He would go quietly. That was the plan. Then came the surgery and the discovery that should have saved him from all of it. The cancer was not cancer. It was a benign ulcer. Treatable, survivable, not a death sentence at all. Albert Stevens did not have 6 months to live. He had decades with plutonium inside him. Here is what the doctors decided to do with that information. Nothing. They said nothing to Albert Stevens. They said nothing to his wife. They continued to monitor him. They continued to collect his samples. They needed his body to keep generating data, so they needed him close. They offered him $50 a month for his stool samples. He accepted. He thought they were being generous. He thought he had survived cancer. He thought the doctors liked him. Let me give you the numbers, because the numbers are the entire point. Over 21 years, the plutonium inside Albert Stevens delivered an effective radiation dose of 64 sieverts. The current annual permitted dose for a radiation worker in the United States, someone who works professionally with radioactive material, is 0.05 sieverts per year. Albert Stevens absorbed 3 sieverts every year for 21 years. He was absorbing 60 times the maximum safe professional exposure every single year, and he thought he was retired. The most radioactive human being in recorded history was a house painter who lived a quiet life in California and went to bed every night not knowing anything was wrong. Albert Stevens died in 1966. Heart disease, age 79. He died not knowing he had been injected. He died not knowing he had never had cancer. He died not knowing that his quiet retirement had been spent generating data for a government program he was never told existed. And then, one final thing. After he died, the Department of Energy collected his cremated remains. They were never returned to his family. They took him apart in life. They took him apart in death, and they never gave him back.
Albert Stevens was one man, but the most disturbing story in this program is not about a man. It is about a 4-year-old child.
His name was Simeon Shaw. He was 4 years old. He had bone cancer, and his parents, living in Australia, did what any parents do when their child is sick. They searched the world for help. They found a hospital in California that said it could treat him. They crossed an ocean. His mother was only allowed to visit occasionally. While she waited outside, inside the ward, Simeon received a plutonium injection. He was discharged within a month. He died 8 months later. Simeon's parents brought their son home to Australia to die. He died. They grieved. They buried him. They carried on, the way parents do when there is no other choice. And they believed, as any family would, that the American doctors had done everything they possibly could. 30 years passed. 30 years of not knowing. Then, declassified documents began to surface, and a family in Australia found out what had really been inside their son, what those American doctors had really done, what the injections were actually for.
In April of 1947, as the plutonium injections were coming to an end, a memorandum circulated within the Atomic Energy Commission. The subject was whether the human radiation experiments should be made public. The conclusion was written clearly. They should not be disclosed because it might have an adverse effect on public opinion or result in legal suits. That was the full calculation, not ethics, not the 18 people injected without consent, not the pregnant women, not the children. Public relations, legal liability. Classify it, bury it, wait.
3 years later, in 1950, one of the scientists who had led the human experiment program wrote a memo to the Atomic Energy Commission. His name was Dr. Joseph Hamilton. He had been one of the architects of these injections. In this memo, Dr. Hamilton recommended against continuing human radiation experiments, not because he believed they were wrong, because he was worried about how they would look. He wrote in his own hand that further experiments would give the program Buchenwald, a Nazi concentration camp. Written by one of the men who designed the program in an internal government memo that was then classified for decades.
Because the plutonium injections were only the beginning. The program expanded. It continued for 3 more decades after 1947. In Nashville, pregnant women were given radioactive cocktails during prenatal visits. They were told it was vitamins. In Oregon and Washington, prisoners had their testicles irradiated with neutron beams. At the University of Cincinnati, nearly 200 patients received full-body radiation doses far beyond therapeutic levels. Most of them were poor. Most of them were black. They were told it was cancer treatment. In Massachusetts, at a state school for homeless and unwanted boys, children who ate breakfast every morning in an institutional cafeteria, the oatmeal was laced with radioactive iron and calcium. The experiment was co-sponsored by MIT and by the Quaker Oats Company. Not one of these people was told. Not one of them was asked. For 40 years, these people existed only as code numbers in classified government files. HP-12, Cal-1, a 4-year-old boy with a project designation instead of a name. Then a reporter named Eileen Wellsome started pulling on a thread. She filed Freedom of Information Act requests. She gathered fragments. She tracked code numbers across hospital records and government archives spread across decades. She spent 6 years looking for 18 people, and one by one, she found them. She gave them their names back. She told the world who HP-12 was when he was a human being. She won the Pulitzer Prize. In 1993, President Clinton ordered the federal agencies to release their radiation experiment records. An advisory committee was formed. Investigators combed through decades of classified files. In 1995, they issued their final report. It concluded, and I want you to hear this language carefully, that wrongs were committed. Not crimes, wrongs. Not a single doctor was charged. Not a single hospital was sanctioned. Not one person who designed, approved, or carried out these injections ever stood in a courtroom. The government apologized and moved on. The final report of the Advisory Committee on Human Radiation Experiments was released on October 3, 1995. That was the same day as the O.J. Simpson verdict. Every camera in America was pointed at a courthouse in Los Angeles. Every headline was already written. The report landed quietly. The story vanished. And the full list of every radiation experiment the United States government conducted between 1944 and 1974 has never been fully declassified. Here is what we know. 18 people injected with plutonium. Not one of them asked. Hundreds more irradiated in hospitals across America. Not one of them told. Pregnant women, orphaned boys, prisoners, children, used as instruments, filed as numbers, forgotten as people. The program ran for 30 years. The cover-up ran for 40 more. When it finally came to light, the government issued a report. The report said wrongs were committed. No one was charged, no one was tried, no one went to prison. The scientists who designed the program are remembered in some quarters as pioneers. Albert Stevens is buried somewhere in America. Some of his ashes were taken by the Department of Energy and never returned. The plutonium they put inside him in 1945, the substance they called 49, the product that didn't officially exist, has a half-life measured in centuries. It is technically still decaying. Somewhere in the earth, the evidence of what they did to him continues. Albert Stevens went to a hospital in San Francisco with a stomachache. He came home as the most radioactive human being who ever lived. He painted houses. He raised a family. He died peacefully at 79. He never knew. His family never knew. And the men who did it to him retired with their pensions and their reputations intact.
Like and subscribe to ExploricaGlobal for more.